This is Pretty Much Pop, a culture podcast. And when I posted our last episode to Instagram, let's say I got a pink heart, a yellow star, a green clover, a blue diamond, a purple horseshoe. Not sure what all those means. We're decoding it. Today we're discussing Adolescence, the 4-part British series co-written, co-produced, and starring Stephen Graham as the father of a seemingly normal 13-year-old who's caught having murdered a female classmate. The show has become #1 in 80 countries, breaking Netflix's audience records for a limited series. I'm Mark Linsenmeyer. With children safely over this dangerous age, though I guess they could still commit securities fraud or something like that.
I'm Al Baker, proving my artistic bona fides by delivering all my lines this episode in one clean, unbroken take.
I'm Sarah Lynn Breck, and I have nothing really very pithy to say other than it continues to be really tough to be a kid in middle school.
This is Lawrence Ware, emotionally devastated in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma.
Whose idea was this? Al. The Brit.
This was mine, so I saw this being advertised to me on Netflix, and I was like, I'm going to watch that one day. And then my girlfriend said, I just watched this thing and you have to watch it immediately. And I won't say my girlfriend has a flawless record in those kinds of recommendations, but it's more hits than misses. And I watched this show, and then pretty much the next day or over the next few days, I saw that not only had I watched the show and thought it was not only brilliant, but also deeply timely and important, but also seemingly everybody else in the UK had watched it in the same few days and come to exactly the same conclusion. So there have been shows recently which have been dramatizations of real events that have caused a big impact. There was a drama about something that in the UK is known as the post office scandal, which came out last year, which was a big deal, made a big impact. But this is an entirely fictionalized drama which has had an enormous impact on the public discussion in an incredibly short period of time. And I can't remember the last time something like that happened. So I thought, we've got to talk about this before it becomes a big deal in the US so that we can be like ahead of the curve. I don't know how quickly it's traveled there, so maybe we're already too late. But nonetheless, it's something that's important and definitely worth talking about.
Yes, also insert 2 weeks of editing time on our end. So even if we're talking about it now, perhaps by the time people hear this, the news has flown by. But yes, we didn't do Baby Reindeer when it came out and made a similar, though I guess not as big splash. Anyway, it seems like everybody was watching that at the time. We just decided, right, we had our last discussion at the beginning of this week. So we didn't give ourselves a lot of time to like watch supporting things. I see that the creative team did like this show Boiling Point, which I'd like to check out. We did talk about things thematically related. So there was one called Defending Jacob a couple years ago on Apple TV. That's a similar premise. This film, 2011, We Need to Talk About Kevin, is one that affected me quite a lot that I recommended to all of you. But yeah, I figure there's probably enough even just in this show to fill up an hour.
Yeah, I was thinking about like how this kind of fits in with films about troubled kids. And I feel like we've been sort of circling this for a really long time. You know, I mean, I would put this in the same kind of category as Kids or 13, you know, from 20 or 25 years ago, or even Boys in the Hood. You know, I was just thinking of how difficult it has always been raising boys specifically in these toxic environments, or environments that can feel quite toxic for a 13-year-old or 14-year-old boy.
Well, guys, I did not enjoy my viewing experience because the show emotionally devastated me. I thought during the first episode, it was going to be one of those cheeky British mysteries that I so much enjoy.
Oh, dear.
You know, I thought it was going to be a mystery box whodunit. We go to trial and there's going to be some... It's not that.
It is not.
It's not that. That's not the show. I mean, are we spoiling this? Can we just
I think we
tell the people?
Yes, tell people just stop and just watch the damn thing. Like, it is one of those things, even if we spoil what happens, I don't think it matters. In fact, it might help prepare you, because I was expecting more episodes at least. Like, oh, it's over? What?
I would go so far as to say this show is unspoilable because the plot isn't what's important.
Okay, let's just talk about this. All right, so in the first episode, you get what you would get in an entire season of a show where you're trying to figure out if the kid do it, is he telling the truth? Well, now, at the end of the first episode, kid did it. Like, the kid killed this young lady. And what the show is really about is not the mystery of the crime, but rather the emotional ripples that happen because of what's happened. So you get to see what's happening in the school. Then you get to see the kid dealing with what he's done and trying to rationalize it and come to terms with it. Then you get the larger family emotions and community response to what's happened. So this is emotionally devastating because it's not a fun thing where you see a crime and you try to figure out who did it. It's about a crime has happened. Now what happens next? Mm-hmm. And that is, I keep saying emotionally devastating. I'm going to try to find a different phrase, but that is just so heavy to sit with the reality of what happens after the first 48 or what happens after the crime podcast you listen to. Like what happens in the months and years to come. Once you know who did it, once you have solved the crime, now you have to deal with the reality of it. I thought that the show was brilliant. I was really happy to see Ashley Walters. I'm a big fan of his in those first 2 episodes. I thought the direction was really interesting. I was watching closely for the subtle cuts. I think I caught a few of them, but it was very well directed. I thought it was very impactful. And I think that the direction of a single take draws you in to what's happening on the screen. So, I mean, Al, as far as a good show, I mean, it's a great show. It's very well made, but is it a fun watch? It is not a fun watch. I did not have a good time watching it, but I absolutely am happy I watched it, but I will never watch it again. And I don't know if I will ever trust Stephen Graham again, even though I will say he looked great in this show. It's clear he's been working out, preparing for the 1,000 Blows, 100 Blows. It's on Hulu. It's a really good show. But man, this show wrecked me. Like, I'm not going to say I cried, but it got really misty, really misty in my house.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not terribly surprised that you had that reaction, and the show is really hard. It's incredibly well made, but really hard to watch and deliberately kind of hard to watch. There's one other important thing that the show is trying to do, I think is worth honing in on, as well as exploring the practical realities of what happens in the aftermath of a horrific crime like this. And it's very upfront about this. The show explicitly says at one point in dialogue between 2 cops in the first episode that the why is the important thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yes, the impact, but one thing that the show doesn't do, which it's actually been called out on a lot in the press, is it doesn't go into the impact on the victims. We never see the victim's family.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. That's a really good point.
We never hear directly from the victim. Some people are very unhappy about that because they think that this repeats the pattern of focusing on the perpetrator and glorifying the crime in a sense. Mm-hmm. But I think the show does a very good job of maintaining its clarity and focus in that what it is interested in is exploring the different hypotheses that we might have about why something like this happens. And the first thing to say is that things like this do happen. Like the show was inspired directly by 2 real life events in which 2 young boys, like a few months apart and in different parts of the country, killed their classmates of theirs who were girls.
Oh my God.
So the show is very interested in raising potential hypotheses that we might have about why this happened and really drilling through how plausible those things are as explanations. And one really interesting reaction I've observed in the discourse around this show is that people will focus on one thing or the other. People will say, like, this was a kid who was radicalized online, or this shows the effect that social media is having in school, or this shows that, like, parents need to be more involved, or this shows, like, the effect of toxic masculinity, or whatever. But I think it's really important that the show is saying it is all of these things.
Exactly.
And none of these things. It's everything. And I've never seen a show in the crime genre be so thoughtful about the why. And that's one of the reasons I think this is so special.
I've heard the show kind of characterized as a whodunit versus a whodunit. Mm-hmm. But you're so right. It doesn't offer any easy answers. Jamie appears to be a fairly normal 13-year-old boy. In many ways, he's very sweet. He has a teddy bear that he keeps on his bed. You know, he still lives in a room full of the stars on his bed sheets and stuff. And that's what I think is so upsetting about this show, is that there aren't any easy answers. And at the same time, the show really shows how the people and systems in place fail boys like Jamie. And he doesn't have any markers of somebody who would be, drawn to the incel culture, for example, or drawn to pornography or anything like that. He isn't on the autism spectrum. He has friends at school, and so by all marks, he appears to be just a very normal kid. And that, as a parent, that is terrifying. That is terrifying because that could be any kid. That could be my kid.
The comparisons I was initially making, we need to talk about Kevin, which is a sort of a longitudinal, a mother has trouble loving her child and how this affects him throughout his life and the warning signs and what do you do when you see somebody that's like this, to keep them, how do you know how far that they're going to go? Which is, obviously very different than this. And this really is addressing this specific point in time. I'm kind of torn as to whether I felt like, well, if you're going to raise this as the main thing, this incel culture and bullying, should you maybe explore it more? Every article I was seeing online was like, is there going to be a season 2? Is there going to be a season 2? The writer says, absolutely not. Stephen Graham says, well, maybe we'll do a follow-up series. Maybe we'll do a spiritual sequel,
No, I don't see it.
But there definitely could have been more episodes. Right. One from the victim's family's point of view. One from, eventually we see Andrew Tate. And is crying, and they get the real Andrew Tate to come, and he's so upset about what's happened as a result of his words.
He does not give a shit.
I'm just saying, once you raise this idea of there are different points of view, you could do many, many points of view. In fact, did we even need episode 4? Did we need his family?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. There's important stuff in that is just about the consequences for the family, but the stuff in there that's vital for the show feeds into these whys. And there's 2 specific parts. There's the fact that in season 4, we get to see on screen the toxic masculinity that existed in Jamie's life in the shape of his dad clearly has some anger issues. And what the show does, which is really interesting, is it shows he's got these issues, but he also knows how to handle them. They're under control. These aren't the kind of things that, and we also, he says, my dad beat me, right? This is not someone who would look at him and say, this guy's anger management issues make him a bad dad, but is clearly on screen is something which probably contributed to Jamie's psychology in a way that made him vulnerable. And the second thing is the conversation that the parents have towards the end, where they just say outright, we didn't do anything wrong, but we did make him. And that's a really important thesis statement for the show to say. This is something I've seen Stephen Graham talk about in interviews, that one of the things the framing that he wanted to lay across this story was how it takes a village. You have to acknowledge that when a member of your community does something horrific, that is still a member of your community. It doesn't do you any good to say this person is evil, ostracize them, and then stop the inquiry at that point. So that's crucially why I thought that the 4th episode was really important that it was there, and why something like further exploration of the manosphere or wider societal impacts of the crime would have been outside of the scope of the show. There's one thing I think the show did really well was focusing on what it wanted to focus on and not engaging in any kind of mission creep.
Right. And they have another child.
They do.
Who is also plunged in the same family. She's also surrounded by school friends, and I'm sure she's getting bullied, especially after her brother was taken into custody. She also has a smartphone. She's raised by the same parents, and she seems to be doing okay, or she's going to be okay.
One of the things that I absolutely loved, and it's so subtle, is that in the very first episode, the way that the police respond to this, because the parents are having their worst day ever, and it's Tuesday for the police, right? And they're so, not unkind, they're very kind, and they're very considerate, and they know that they're dealing with a juvenile, but yet it's just another day for them. And I thought that was so interesting, that the way that it's all presented is them having a banal conversation and then going into busting into this kid's house. It's just so interesting. The police are presented as not bad guys, not necessarily good guys. They're just doing a job. It's like making bagels in a bagel shop. They just have to do their job. And their job may be ruining a kid's life and completely upending a family's existence on the planet. But for them, It's Another Wednesday. I thought it was a really interesting, brilliant portrayal of police work.
The thing that came to mind to me about that kind of portrayal of police work, and also the other various public servants who are involved at various points, so the psychologists, the solicitors, and so on. Mm-hmm. The show seemed to me to be showing how important it is that the professionals involved in this situation are professional. So you talk about how it just being another Wednesday for them. In one sense, it's not, because whenever they have like a personal moment, they're always talking to each other about like, oh, this one's a bit grim, isn't it? That does come across. They're not robots. Mm-hmm. But what they are is extremely professional. And what's clearly running through the portrayal of these guys is, in their position, the best thing that they can do for everybody is their jobs as well and as above the board as possible. Mm-hmm. Everybody feels the horror of what's happening, but no one lets it get in the way of doing what they know they have to do.
I would even go so far as to say their compassion toward Jamie and his parents. Mm-hmm. And I know that they busted in at the crack of dawn into their home, which you're right, Lawrence, that's the worst day of their lives. For these professional folks, this could be another Tuesday for them. But they were all, I thought that was a really good detail on the part of the show, because you can't blame the police for anything that might go wrong with this family, because it's not their fault. They were absolutely above board, and they treated Jamie and his family with compassion and care.
They absolutely did. And then I thought it was interesting that the police were on the complete wrong trail. They didn't understand what was going on. And then Ashley Walters' son, Ashley Walters is a black actor who I absolutely love. He's in Top Boy. He's in a lot of different things.
He was so good.
He was recently in a Harlan Coben show. I forgot the name of the show. But nevertheless, he was on the complete wrong path. Like, he did not understand what was going on. And his son had to pull him to the side and say, look, Dad, you're fumbling. Like, you're not doing a good job. You're fumbling the bag, as the kids would say. He explains to him what these things mean, because his understanding was that the girl was friendly with the kid. And he had to explain to him, no, that's not friendship. That's not a friendly kind of, thing. And it put him on the right path. It's so many commentaries upon class. There's commentaries upon generations and how those of us who are older, I can't believe I'm saying this. I mean, I guess I'm older, but those of us who are older don't really fully understand our kids. Like, I remember when my kids first said za, I had no idea what the hell they're talking about. Like, what is za? Right? And now I'm using za in my classroom. But I'm not like using it. I use the phrase. Anyway, but the point nevertheless, though.
That's so cringe, Lawrence.
So, get out of here. I can't even think of what I want to say. But the point nevertheless is that there's this disconnect between the older generation. And it feels like, has the disconnect always been there? Like, was my mother struggling to relate to me in the same way that I feel like I'm struggling to relate to the younger generation? I don't know, but it just seems like it's so well put forward, that disconnect, and how the older folks do not get it. And it takes someone younger to kind of make clear what was there in the subtext.
So are the children just being treated as aliens? The one I saw on Rotten Tomatoes, there's one negative review. So, of course, I found that one out of the 100 negative reviews.
Sounds like you.
But it was from the New Yorker.
Right, from the New Yorker. And it was just saying basically that it opens this bag of worms, but it doesn't explore it at all. It's just about the adults being baffled by it. And the fact that you switch perspectives. Like, I could understand if the whole thing was just from the parent's perspective, but now we're going to go to this psychologist's perspective, where we get as close as we can to the perpetrators, the kids' perspective. But it seems there are a number of people, right? You get in episode 2, some things about the peers and some glimpse into this world, but you don't, there could have been another episode that was from, his friend's perspective, who we get a little bit of information about. Mostly this is about, you hear a terrible thing happen and you want to know the details. And a documentary about a crime is going to dwell on these details as much as they are known. And there's so many other things that were known, or, given the flexibility of a fictional narrative, that you could put, you could reveal anybody. You could have the last episode have been, finally, we're going to go back and give the whole thing from Jamie's perspective, and like how mad he was walking around town, instead of just having seen it in the first episode on some security footage. So it would be really interesting, to actually have a discussion about what is the dynamics? How much of it is incel culture versus bullying? Like, I thought it was the fact that the girls knew about the incel culture and were calling you incels, that it's not so much that, oh, I was watching Andrew Tate and he said you should go kill women, but that this is a thing used to reduce boys his age. And I feel like I do not fully understand it, and I want to.
What you said, Al, was so right. It is a village. It's not just it takes a village, but it is a village raising your kid. So it's not just the parents. It's not just your family or your relatives. It's not just friends at school. It's everything. Your teachers. And now it's social media. It's assholes like Andrew Tate. You know, it's everything that is influencing your kid. And they all know your kid in different ways.
You're absolutely right, and it is everything. And there's so much that I think is interesting in what you said, Mark, because absolutely, we would have been interested in all of that. And again, you're absolutely right. One of the traditional ways you would end a series like this is by establishing in the last episode a true explanation for what happened. Like, this is how all these contributing factors led to this crime. But that, I think, so firstly, it goes back to the point about what they're trying to do. And I think it would defeat the purpose of the show, because in establishing a true explanation, you're defeating the purpose if what you're trying to do is say that there are many competing explanations and it's important that we bear on them all. But it also hits on a really significant way why I think this show is better than almost any other kind of crime drama that I've ever seen, which is that I think people underappreciate that one of the dangers of storytelling in any form is that by making something definitive, and what stories often do is give a kind of explanation in moral or psychological terms for a plot, for the event of a plot. But by making that explicit, you're giving a kind of explanation which is almost never available in real life. So you're right, we could have the scene where we see him omnisciently on the camera going through the part. We can see how angry he is. We can have voiceover of the psychologically relevant things which people have said to him that are playing in his mind, right? So we can get a really clear picture of what's going on. But then as an audience, we're going to take away from that, oh, these are the factors. The point the show is trying to make, or one of the points the show is trying to make, is that in the real world, all we do have is the bit that we saw on CCTV and the testimony of various people and what our children tell us are the relevant social factors at play. And the rest is guesswork. So by offering anything more concrete by way of explanation, I think it would have done serious damage to the core conceit of the show.
Yeah, it doesn't let the audience off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing that jumped out to me is that children in Britain are animals. Like, they are terrible.
What?
All that grunting and talking with them. It's all the British children.
How did you guys get on with the accents? I wondered if you needed subtitles.
I use subtitles in anything that I watch, so
That was fine.
I think the accents were fine. I thought the accents were fine. Okay, but the kids in that, like, it reminded me of, like, Beautiful Minds. I don't know if you guys know that Michelle Pfeiffer movie. Or, you know, some inner city movie, like Lean on Me, where kids are just, like, running amok and evil. Like, those kids were evil. Like, what is going on in Britain? Like, why are you guys, what are you guys doing there? And Al, were you bad like that when you were that kid, that age?
None of those kids were doing anything. So I went to a similar kind of school.
Yes, they were so disrespectful.
Whoa. This is a truth bomb, right? I went to a similar kind of school. My school was probably slightly better managed than the one that they showed on the screen. Managed, but it was a comprehensive school with a similar kind of makeup of kind of kids.
Public school or?
What we call public schools in the UK are the most exclusive private schools.
Right.
For reasons that don't matter. But comprehensive schools are what you would call public schools. So this was a comprehensive school. And none of the behavior that I saw there was particularly, like, egregious. Kids are little shits, and they do...
Mm-hmm.
Come on. Those kids were bad, man. Those were bad kids.
No, Lawrence.
No, they were not. No, they were not. Those kids were terrible.
Lawrence.
They had great accents, but they were very terrible.
You grew up in Oklahoma where everybody's very polite. But in the UK, in the mean streets of the UK, in schools, I saw much worse stuff than I mean, not murder, but in terms of the actual behavior around the school premises that they showed.
Yeah.
That was all par for the course. There's something else I want to say, and this is, when in the second episode when they're in the school, and the teachers are talking about, like, how bad this could get for the school, what they say is they're talking about metal detectors, which is something that we have imported from you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
I remember my school being like, I remember there was bad stuff that happened and I got in more than enough fights, but those kids were so terrible. Maybe I'm just so removed from it because I teach in a college setting and everyone's kind of orderly. Those kids think bad.
I think we are removed from it. I think the number of fights and bomb threats and things like at public schools in, my fairly well-to-do Madison school district, not exclusive, not like where I grew up, which, was in John Hughes land on the north suburbs of Chicago, where it was very, probably even they're complaining about the same stuff at this point. Mm-hmm. My son just never had any real problems with him other than when he was much younger and had too much energy. But just then, the first time he had a bunch of kids and I heard how much they would swear to each other, like how different the kid culture was either from what I expected, given, my observing them on the playground or whatever a few years earlier and my own experience. But yeah, even our experience, like age 11 through 14, I mean, we're setting stuff on fire. There's pornography around the school, like of people at the school, like stuff like that, even back then.
Oh no, I think I might have been bad. Uh-oh. Okay.
But this is, middle schoolers are going to middle school.
Middle school is a tough time, yeah.
That is a tough time for everyone. But what I liked about the show is, again, like you've got this kid who, by all appearances, seems like a normal kid who would fit into that school with everybody else. And it's also extraordinarily rare that someone is going to go off the rails and stab another kid. This is a very, very rare thing. However, when the show allows us to kind of dig under the surface here, there is, a level of sweetness to this kid, but there's also a deep, deep well of anger and insecurity and isolation that he's feeling. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that and why kids who on the surface seem like they're fine are really not fine.
Yeah, there was something that, I can't remember who brought it up earlier when we were talking about Jamie and his relationship to like the manosphere stuff. One of the things that I thought was super interesting was that moment in the psychologist episode where he almost in the same breath distances himself from incel culture, says like, I'm not one of them. And he also clearly knows that it's bad to be an incel, especially because like one of the main ways that people bullied him was by calling him an incel. But he has also clearly internalized a lot of the incel kind of talking points. So like the 80-20 rule, which comes up in the show a few times, which is the idea that supposedly 80% of women are attracted to 20% of men. He says, again, almost in the same breath, this isn't something I believe, or this I don't think this is true. But then from what he says a few seconds later, it's clear that he does believe it's true, or at least acts as if it's true.
I don't know what the percentage is. I just know I'm in the lower group.
Yeah. And he doesn't use the word negging, but his kind of romantic tactic that he talks about with the psychologist when he made his approach to Katie was clearly showed that his understanding of how romantic relationships works has been primarily informed by incel talking points. And so again, the show doesn't give us a clear answer. One thing that people get very, very wrong about incel culture, toxic masculinity, and the manosphere is about precisely that question of whether somebody has to be affiliated with the ideology or to participate actively in the ideology in order for that ideology to frame or to shape how they think. And I think here we have a really, like, probably a very common example of what happens when someone knows that they shouldn't adhere to a particular ideology and would denounce it if asked, but has still grown up in an environment where they're exposed to so much of it that it just has shaped the way that they view the world. And that's far more kind of troubling danger than people who are full-throated, paid-up supporters of that kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to be honest. I didn't know very much at all about incel anything. I remember that I got in trouble a few years ago when I wrote my review of Joker, that a lot of incels came after me. But I didn't take it very seriously, and I didn't do any research into what that was all about. Like, so you guys have thrown around the name Andrew Tate. I don't know who that person is. I have no idea. Like, I laughed and went along because I wanted to seem cool, but I don't know who that person is.
I'll say I know almost nothing about it as well. And so anybody who like,
me too,
who's listening to this, who's like, you're not giving him a fair shake. Like, we don't want to hear it. Okay. It's fine. We have more to learn.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that, but it is, a convenient punching bag. And from what I understand,
I don't think I want to learn.
You don't want to mess with the Google's algorithm either, because that stuff is just going to keep popping up on your screen the more you try and research it.
And the whole 80-20 thing, and like, I didn't understand that. Like, I don't understand that. Like, I've been pretty good with the ladies, so maybe I'm in that 80 or whatever, that 20. I don't know. That was a joke, guys. Like, you guys are looking at me condescendingly.
No, it was absolute faithful belief in what you just said, Lawrence.
Yes, and it is a wonderful thing to
Sarah,
understand.
Don't start with me, Sarah.
And to reveal to young people that, like, you know what? I don't know what the percentage is, but you only need one to be interested in you.
That's all you need. That's all, and you can be good, right? All you need is that one fish in the sea. So a lot of that stuff, I didn't have any frame of reference. I didn't know what was going on with that. And apparently it might be big now. Maybe that's just a disconnect again of my generation, or me rather, from the younger generation. But I did not understand it. I didn't understand. Perhaps you guys can articulate for us, who is Andrew Tate? What is incel culture? I don't know what it is.
It's complicated. Andrew Tate is a social media influencer and is a suspected sex trafficker.
Whoa!
Yeah, he's a real dirtbag.
Sarah told me not to Google it, so I don't want to Google it.
Don't. It's not worth it.
Who has become like very prominent as an influencer popular among young boys. And he's inherited a strong central public place in what's become known as incel culture. Incel culture is something that grew out of murky internet subcultures over the last 10 to 15 years in places like 4chan that you may be familiar with, which is essentially a backlash against feminism. And the idea is that this is an ideology in which men who feel like they have been overlooked or made obsolete can vent their frustrations about how they're losing out in the world now because too many privileges being given to women or to people of color or whoever their target audience is.
And women who have the audacity to not want to, like if they find out, you people in the US, that you are a Trump voter, then there might be like that, since there's quite a disparity in the gender gap between who supported what, the fact that people are putting on their dating profiles, like, of course, I'm not going to vote anybody who's a Trump voter. And, you know, on the one hand, we can understand that from her point of view. But on the other hand, the numbers are such that this means that there's going to be a whole bunch of lonely guys. And they feel like they're being coerced into accepting that they're Nietzsche. The crowd is trying to pull them down and accept something that would stultify them and make them, they hate everything that is strong and admirable about me. And so I either have to go along with it or I don't get to have a girlfriend.
Wow.
Yeah. A crucial element to this culture that kind of brings it all together is the idea of red pilling, even though not every element of the culture uses the phrase. But red pilling is the kind of tenet of the ideology which suggests that liberal orthodoxies which prioritize things like, you know, equality and equal rights between men and women and so on and so forth are artificial moral constructs that are subversions of a deeper moral reality. So things like the 80-20 rule, according to incel culture, are the brute moral facts of the world. So there's a kind of a real hostility to a kind of liberal politics, which might say you just have to be yourself and you yourself are worthy of love, regardless of whether or not you're a masculine man. And the red pill then says, look, this is nonsense. This is a matrix-like hallucination that they're forcing on you. The real facts of the matter are that if you're not an alpha male, you're not going to get anywhere socially. And so if you're not, you should just, you know, give up, be beta, be an incel, and like exist in this horrible situation. And that's, just to get back to the show, that's the kind of stuff which is clearly playing on Jamie's mind. But it is it is important to be curious about Andrew Tate and to be curious about incel culture broadly construed, because one thing which is clearly the case is that it has had an outsized political impact. Donald Trump won, again, we still don't fully understand Donald Trump's most recent victory, but one clear pattern is that one of the key constituencies that he won his election on was young men. And one thing that this show, that Adolescence, does incredibly well is demonstrate how important it is to remain curious about things that we find baffling or upsetting or, you know, morally tricky, because there are real political consequences if you let yourself ignore them.
Let me then just change my directive to the audience, is that if you know so much more about this, we have on Partially Examined Life have gotten a recommendation now and again, like, why don't you've done feminism? Why don't you do sort of men's, and we just sort of roll our eyes like, no, this is not worthy of intellectual study, but there probably is a book somewhere. So if somebody can recommend, something that really explains this and is philosophically respectable, I would be happy to look at it.
And we should probably talk about the acting because Jamie, the actor, Owen, whatever, is amazing.
Never acted before. It
felt like watching Timothée Chalamet first role, or like Leonardo DiCaprio when he was young. It just felt like a coming out for an amazing actor because he was incredible.
So good.
It's like watching Jake Lloyd's first role. Sorry.
Okay, that's too far. And you probably shouldn't pick on a guy who has mental health issues.
That's young Anakin. Sorry.
Young Anakin. He has mental health issues also. Don't pick on him. You're mean, Mark.
Besides which, 10 and 13 are a big difference.
This is a bully-free zone, Mark.
Sorry.
You're engaging in the very activity that led to what happened. But the third episode in particular was such a powerhouse of a performance. I really enjoyed that. But back to the question. So do you think that Jamie was bought into incel culture? Like he thought it was like he saw himself as an incel, or is he just influenced by it? Right. And it's just in the ethos.
I think he was 13 and he is not going to be mature enough to meaningfully have a political ideology. I think it's very clear that he knows that incels are banned and that he doesn't want to be associated with it. And he knows that he's expected to denounce incel ideas. But it is also clear that when those ideas aren't framed to him as incel ideas, he buys into some of them. So I think it's complicated.
There's also that sense, and there's a connection here between that incel culture, the character of Jamie, and even like the whole MAGA movement, is that idea of victimhood, that they're victims. And I was fascinated by this kid. And it seemed like a lot of the kids, the son of the cop also was saying, he was feeling, well, I'm not popular. You were popular, so you don't understand. And Jamie was, when he was talking to his psychologist, you're posh, you're pretty. I feel like I'm ugly, so you don't understand. And it just kind of shuts things down for him. He's no longer receptive to any sort of messaging. And he's also, again, it comes right back to the fact that he's 13 years old. That is such a terrible time to be alive sometimes. It's not great for the best of us. But when you're really struggling with your sense of self, it's like 100 times worse.
Were you surprised on just how that 13 is a really interesting age, right? As opposed to 11 or whatever, when 11, you probably just don't know what you don't know, where 13, you have enough view of the adult world that you think you figured it out and you think you can be all ironic and crafty and things, even though you're still a bumbling idiot. It's just really a fascinating, just having conversations with people that age. That could be a whole show in itself.
Yeah. You feel completely alone. You don't recognize that you're just one of millions and millions of other people who have felt the exact same way. But that is such a trite thing to say to a 13-year-old. You're not supposed to say that. They're tough little cookies. And
I was also wondering to what extent, right, in our 80s, early 90s teen worlds, there were definite castes. So like, oh, well, I'm a geek.
Mm-hmm.
But then maybe there are girl geeks that I can still be friends with or something.
Mm-hmm.
Or even if, there aren't, you realize like, well, once you get into high school, once you get beyond high school, those things won't matter. So at least you sort of underline, but I feel like maybe we've kind of stripped those particular distinctions away. There might be still the class distinctions, the posh versus whatever distinctions, but so that there's not a, like, well, I'm the king of the dipshits, as the guy in 16 Candles says. Like, there's no way you can have status unless you have status in the larger group. Like, that having these castes, as awful as that was, at least gave you some sense of belonging in a caste that he just does not have.
Belonging to something.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's so important. And that's exactly what the incel culture does, is it gives people who feel that way a sense of fraternity. They have these people who agree with them. I mean, I wonder if we could kind of kill some of this toxic masculinity if more boys and girls are willing to be just friends with each other, get to know each other on a human level.
I think you may be right.
Yeah, I'm sure that would help. There's a degree to which, particularly at that age, kind of 11, 12 to 14 feels like a heavily segregationist period of growth.
Yeah.
It very much. I remember going to my kids' like dances, like they would go to dances. They're all about these dances. And then the guys are on one side of the dance floor hanging out with each other. The girls on the other side of the dance floor hanging out with each other. And like, there may be like one couple that maybe they kind of flirt with dancing, but not actually dance. Like, it's just, that's such an awkward time. You are intrigued by the opposite sex, but you also don't want anything to do with the opposite sex. It's such an interesting time.
Yeah, that has never changed. I went to dances in junior high school and it was the same thing. Girls on one side of the room, boys on the other. There were a few people who were dancing together, but usually it was the cool group.
We had sock hops.
You had sock hops?
I can't believe that they made us have sock hops. I don't know what that
Did
was
you grow
about.
up in the 1950s, Lawrence? Is this what you're saying?
I did not.
No, I grew up in Oklahoma and it's much of a muchness.
Do not. I'm not going to let you come from my state, sir. Nor my country, sir.
Where the winds come sweeping down the plains. I love it.
There's a uniquely American nostalgic thing for sock hop. There was something on the public access channel called Sock Hops with the Cops.
Get out of here. Are you serious?
I guess they would throw dances that were thrown by the cops that were shown on my Chicago area public access channel.
Wow. Sock hops with the cops. That sounds like a terrible idea.
I didn't think that we'd be comparing this film to, like, I was brought to mind the Bo Burnham film 8th Grade, which is so cringy from the first minute. It's like this girl filming herself on Instagram sort of story.
Aww.
But yeah, the film as a whole does really get into this, fill in a gap from what I was saying that I wanted more out of this. And as Alice correctly pointed out, well, this was not supposed to give us that. It was not supposed to give us the kid's perspective. It is about the social problem. But yes, there's plenty of other probably accurate films that do get into this. So that's fine.
How do you think the way that it was filmed, like as the one shot for each episode, added to our understanding of the story?
I was really enthusiastic about the show going in, and like within the first 2 scenes, you're watching something that's being made with a huge amount of artistic intention and care. But I was very skeptical about the one shot thing because in my view, because that's a real like 15-minute guitar solo kind of maneuver for a TV show to do, like to say, yeah, we're going to make a really good show, but we're also going to make it really unnecessarily difficult for ourselves. And using the one shot, I mean, I'm sure Lawrence can talk for 20 minutes about the history of how the one shot take is just the biggest kind of artsy wankerish maneuver that a director can do.
It's not wankerish. Don't do that. Don't disparage Quentin Tarantino and Martin Scorsese and the great people who came before.
Especially Scorsese, they do it because they can. And Spielberg is like the master of this, obviously. And we love it, but it's a showy maneuver. And my thing was, I'm in for it. You go fill your boots. You show off if you want to. But what I was on the lookout for were places where that distracted from the story. And I think it did 1 or 2 places. It was like, maybe this episode would have been better if they'd allowed a cut here, 10 minutes to pass so that we could like move the story on a little bit more briskly. But really not. It wasn't anywhere near as distracting as I thought it was going to be. And what it adds to the show is this sense of reality because you see, the shows are 45 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes long.
Oh, it's like close to an hour.
Close to an hour, but however long they are, that's the amount of time of the story that you're seeing in each case. It's not like 24 where the story picks up again directly after the end of the last one, but it is a real time show. And that just makes it feel a lot more real, especially in the early episode with the police station, like the fact that because it's a process story, so much of it, and the fact that you're just walking through the process, literally step by step, what happens when a kid is getting arrested for a serious crime. And that adds a huge amount to it. And I think the show deserves a lot of credit because it didn't get very distracting. And one other thing that I think the long shots do is interestingly make the kids' acting jobs a bit easier.
Oh, how so?
Well, I think easier might be too harsh because it's obviously an incredibly hard thing to do. But there's a lot of places where Jamie stumbles over his lines in long dialogue scenes. But the fact that it's all one shot makes that read as organic and not clumsy. And that so places like that where everything isn't perfect, people don't hit their marks completely perfectly, it plays into the sense of reality and doesn't detract from it in a way that a more sharply edited piece might have.
Can I just ask, did all three of you know that this was one shot before you watched the show?
Yes.
Yes.
I did know because I just kind of picked up on it.
Okay. So I uniquely did not know this. I just watched it and I certainly noticed, wow, in the arrest thing, like that, they're really taking us through like, and it's serving the purpose of how anxious would I get if I were arrested or my kid were arrested like this of, and going through all the steps. But I don't think I really noticed it as a whole for the other episodes. Okay, now that you point out, okay, there's no breaks and there was not a need for a break, but I wouldn't have been surprised in the fourth episode if there were some distinct scenes. There was nothing about that. Like, okay, you get a little bit of his rising, the changes of his mood throughout his birthday where he's getting more and more and running into this, but it doesn't serve the same purpose in all four times. It's not like this increasing tension. Certainly episode 2 is not like increasing tension. It's just like they go and they visit a bunch of classrooms and it's kind of cool. But like, yeah, that's another one where I wouldn't have been surprised if you had told me, oh yeah, there were several cuts. You just didn't notice them.
No, I think you're right. I think in the first episode and the second and the third episode, the single shot is necessary. I think you're right. That second episode, you kind of don't need that. But there is something about when you do a single shot. By the way, there's a really not good, kind of good action movie that's done in one shot that was big on Netflix called One More Shot, starring Scott Adkins. And for some reason, it brought this to mind for me. But when you do a single shot thing, you're following it in real time by necessity, right? And so you begin to see, like in episode 1 and episode 3, the mood changes and the thought process that the kids and people around the person is going through. That's very important to the story. Not so much on that second episode and the fourth. Well, maybe on the fourth one, actually, because you get to see the father come to terms with it. So the more I talk about it, the more I might be okay with it. Like, I don't think it is hoity-toity artistry gimmickry like Al says it is. But nevertheless, I do think that it does serve a narrative purpose because it condenses the time.
100%.
It transports you into the mind of the characters. You're living with them. You're thinking about them. You're thinking about it. And I don't think that the end of episode 1 would have hit me as hard as it did had it not been in one shot.
Yeah.
That is kind of a necessary thing. So yeah, I kind of do think it was necessary. And also watch One More Shot on Netflix. It's a decent movie.
A little commercial there. No, I think like the oneer, I can understand why that would be annoying and kind of show-offy, but at the same time, I felt like it definitely had a narrative purpose. It's like point of view in literature. I kept thinking, oh, is this like an omniscient kind of point of view? It was certainly, I think, meant to be objective, an objective eye into this situation, which is why it's so hard to kind of nail down, like, part of the point of it was that this was a kid. We don't know exactly why he did what he did. There are lots of different things that we could stitch together, but we're not really sure. And I wondered if it was more like a Virginia Woolf novel where we're kind of going from one perspective to the next, it's like a Mrs. Dalloway or something, we're going from one person to the next kind of seamlessly, and which is so hard to do in literature. And it's really, really hard to do, I think, in a visual form like this, but they did it so, so well.
And it does serve a narrative purpose in Scorsese films, for example, Al Baker. When you get that really long oneer that's in Goodfellas, the whole point of that entire scene is following the characters through the dungeon, through the kitchen, following them up. And it shows like the descent and the elevation, the same, like there is almost always a narrative purpose when the great filmmakers use it, Quentin Tarantino, Scorsese, Spielberg. When it becomes irritating is when there is no narrative function for it. Like when you're just doing it just to say, look at me, I'm a fancy filmmaker, I can do this. That's not where it's cool. But in this show, I thought it was kind of necessary to get the emotional impact that you needed to get. You had to go through the process with the characters.
Yeah, that's really my view on its use here too, because it's one of the many places where the show puts itself on hard mode and it delivers. Like the one shot thing wasn't detracting. They did find a clear purpose for each. Just as you guys were talking, I thought it's really interesting now thinking back on it. The one shot in each episode does seem to be serving a very different intentional purpose. In the first one, as we said, it's like process. It drives the process forward.
Yeah.
I mean, the second one's just a monologue, so it's just a kind of stylistic way of shooting a monologue. And then the third one felt to me like it gave a sense of geography, of space. Like there was just exploring the school, this like sprawling, massive activity, and you were going through this space in a way that was really interesting. So yeah, they did take a big swing and they actually knocked it out of the park. And it is very rare that you see something do both. The show deserves all the awards in the world, but unfortunately, because the BAFTA schedule is hopelessly out of sync with the way TV works in the real world, Adolescence is going to win BAFTAs, but not until late next year.
Emmys are coming up, though.
Yeah, it'll win Emmys. It'll win Golden Globes. Like, it'll win stuff here in America.
How has it done in America? Like, is
well.
everyone
Very
talking
well.
about it?
Very
Is it
well.
the number
Yes.
one? Yeah.
Just, I guess, to wrap us up here. So I was just looking at one-shot films while we were talking. Rope from Alfred Hitchcock, 1948.
Alfred Hitchcock, yeah.
So right. As they point out, like anything that's like a play. Like all plays are necessarily one shot because it's your shot. You're the one sitting, looking at it. Even if they stop and have music and they change the settings, it's still one shot. It's still, you don't leave for the intermission. I guess that's the only time.
Yeah. And the actors, like Ashley Walters, I think was quoted as saying it felt like a play when they were shooting that. Yeah.
But yes, adding the camera work to that, it sounds like to get the scope of the school, he should have handed off the camera to a drone, and then the drone could continue the shot and fly around.
They did.
They did?
In the last episode,
Oh,
they
okay.
did exactly that.
Yeah, they
did exactly that. There was I was honestly gobsmacked because it was obviously handheld for a lot of it. And then there was at this point where they clearly smoothly clicked it onto a drone.
It's so cool. It is just so cool the way they did that.
All right. Well, it does make me want to rewatch it then. I could potentially get over the emotional turmoil of it. But yeah, give it a year. And it does look like there are other options. This Boiling Point, these other things that these people have been involved in. There's more that we could have put into the scope of this.
I mean, Stephen Graham is clearly fast-tracking his way to national treasure status at this point.
Stephen Graham I'm good with, but this was grueling, man. This was a grueling watch.
It's brutal.
A short watch. It breezed through, but I was devastated. Like, once I was done, I had to go to bed and lay down. It was devastating. Y'all are laughing. I'm dead ass serious. I was devastated.
All right. Well, maybe we'll talk a little more about some related stuff if we have any after talk. Patreon.com/prettymuchpop. Thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for the panels. See ya.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Pretty Much Pop is part of the Partially Examined Life podcast network. Get more Pretty Much Pop at prettymuchpop.com. Get bonus content for every episode at patreon.com/prettymuchpop.